Hey, everybody, and welcome to another Into the Terminal. On today's episode, we've taken comments from either chat or comments on videos and decided to answer them because why not? We actually do post answers on comments too, but we thought these were important enough to highlight and put
Yeah,
on the channel.
sometimes a question isn't as easy to answer just like on the spot in a comment. So, it's easier to actually show you the solution and talk it through, right? So, here we are.
Here we are.
Yeah, so the first one we've got, the question was around, Virt-Manager, great tool, but unfortunately it is deprecated and it's going away. And the question is basically, what do we do now? What do we use instead of Virt-Manager? So we've shown this a couple times on the show in the past. Well, maybe not a couple times. We've shown Web Console plenty of times, but I think we had one specific episode where we talked about single host virtualization as a workload style, right? Episode. But the solution, like the alternative to Virt-Manager, is there's a plugin for Web Console that lets you manage virtual machines. Now, of course, you can manage libvirt through the command line, which works. It's a little hard to do sometimes. You really have to learn some stuff to make that operational. The big thing I always struggle with when I'm running libvirt command line is, believe it or not, networking. Right? If you've ever had to set up a bridge with a VLAN and all kinds of stuff, it gets complicated quick. So I wanted to show you that quick first, right? This Web Console also helps solve your networking problems. So you can see I've got bridges set up here. Some of my bridges have IP addresses associated with them. That's actually for containers that I run on the same host that I'm running my virtual machines on. But if you've got a reason to do that, you can do that as well. And you can see also that I've got these virtual VLAN adapters. Let me find one here. That doesn't show them where I thought it showed them. Okay, well, sorry. If I open up one of the bridges, I think it's in there. Shows you the parent interface. Yeah, here. Parent interfaces, ports, and things like that. Here you see this EN6S0F1.2. Totally easy to read, but the .2 tells you that that's the VLAN ID number 2, right? And adding a new network interface with a VLAN and a bridge is like, click on this button here that says add VLAN, and click on this button here that says add bridge, and it brings up a nice little interface. It lets you define the parent interface, the bridge ID, or not the bridge ID, the VLAN ID, and then of course the same deal goes when you add a bridge. You just give it the parent interface, give it a name for the bridge. And you can even give them these very handy names. Like you see, I've named these bridges after what networks they associate to. This is my IoT network. This is where I run services, which is why I call it SVC. This is where I run my lab machines, right? Like for demos that I do for this show, things like that. But that doesn't tell you anything about virtual machines. That's the next thing I wanted to show you. These are all the virtual machines that I have inside of libvirt defined, right, and running on my RHEL host. And I'm just going to pick one of them to show you kind of what the configuration looks like. You can see common configuration stuff, like how much memory I want to assign to the thing, how much CPU it gets, where its disks are located, what boot order it should use, what emulated machine um, the guest is expecting, right? Those are all things that I can configure right through here. You may also notice that there's not the granular stuff that Virt-Manager had. Virt-Manager let you do everything libvirt let you do. Maybe not everything, but almost everything. And that led to a tool that had a ton of clutter in the UI. So I think there were decisions made when this tool was designed to give you the stuff that's most commonly used, right? And for the other things, you're just going to have to go back to libvirt and do a versh edit and modify your machines that way. So I didn't have like a big planned demo here, Scott. Do you anything you want to see here? Anything you think people would really find beneficial? I guess a
Um,
console might be helpful.
yeah, so console for sure. But one other thing, Nate, is I think that over time, the need for complexity in Virt-Manager went away. Like,
Right.
how many IO drivers do you need? I think
Right.
today is one VirtIO.
Right.
And so we didn't have to carry all that stuff because virtualization as a whole just kind of got more mature. And so we didn't need to add that complexity here in Cockpit machines.
Right. So, and that's actually a good thing you brought up. Cockpit Machines is the name of the package you have to install. So you need Cockpit, of course, and then the plugin is called Cockpit-Machines, right? So keep that in mind. But there's two different ways to get to the console. This is the VNC console, which is better for a graphical interface. But obviously, most of my VMs, because I don't run my servers with GUIs, are text mode, which gives me an option that if I really need to. In fact, especially sometimes for this show, when I screen share, for some reason, these consoles are cut off at the bottom. So, and I don't just mean because of the window size. I mean, they actually draw at a size that the text is off the bottom of the console window. But if I switch this over to serial, it's actually a serial console to what would be the console, like if I physically plugged into a physical machine, right? So that's handy. It gives you that option too. If for some reason the VNC console is not working, you can switch to the serial console. And I've never used Desktop Viewer. I think that's for like Windows guests. I'm not really even sure. So, yeah, there we go. Cockpit Machines, great alternative to Virt-Manager. Virt-Manager's not gone yet, but it's going away, I think, in 10. Do we know that for sure? Or is it still just deprecated?
I am pretty confident it will not be there in 10.
Okay, so if you're using Virt-Manager, check out Cockpit Machines. It really is nice. All right.
And I actually do use Cockpit Machines for you can go through a graphical installer. In fact, I've been working on a lab for us for next week when we're doing some training where people can go through the RHEL 10 install and actually click all the buttons and do it step by step. And in Cockpit Machines, like you have access to the console and you can move the mouse and you can click the buttons. So,
yeah.
It also offers graphical interfaces if that's what your jam is.
And, obviously there's a list of supported guests, right? But libvirt lets you run, I mean, anything you'd expect to be able to virtualize. I've run some pretty off the wall guests. Like I've run MS-DOS guests. I've run FreeDOS. Like I have a hobby where I run old BBS systems. So I've run like old versions of Windows and DOS in order to make those things work. And they work. Like you really got to jump through hoops to make them happen, make them work. But having the options that we have for the console is what makes it like really usable.
Yeah. And a lot like for this lab, one of the things we have to do is like set what OS type we are using for this virtual machine. And man, the list of operating system types that are just pre-populated is immense. It's like all different types.
Oh, yeah. In fact, I could show that quick if you want. And sometimes like it changes every time it gets an update. Every time your RHEL host gets an update, that list of possible machines gets larger. Come on, go back to virtual machines. We're going to do create VM.
Virtual machine will also pre-populate things like your disk size and size bases.
Right. So when I pick an operating system, so if I say install from a local ISO and then what is it? Images, no ISOs, right? And then you can see these are all the ISOs that I have in here. You see, I've got like CentOS, I've got Fedora. Let's pick one. I don't know if I have one here that this particular host knows about, but if I use 9.4, you can see it automatically pre-populates an operating system. Now, my host is RHEL 9.3. Because it's RHEL 9.3, it doesn't know about RHEL 9.4 yet. So otherwise, it would have pre-populated RHEL 9.4. It made its best guess here because it doesn't know what RHEL 9.4 is, right? So if I do Red Hat Enterprise, right, here's 9.3. If I picked a 9.3 ISO, it would have pre-populated that. And what that changes... Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, what I was talking about is like when you pop down that list originally, it's like Alpine.
Yeah.
Ubuntu.
Yeah, look, there's ridiculous list here. But what I wanted to call out was once I've selected that, you'll see it'll change things like the storage and memory. And in the background, it changes the number of CPUs if we care how many CPUs it runs. So if I were to pick like, I guess almost not a good example, Alpine maybe? Look, Alpine switched to 128 meg for memory because Alpine's tiny, right? It doesn't need a huge footprint. Whereas, I don't know, let's pick Circle Linux 9. See, the memory footprint has changed, right? So, and these are just, best practice, I suppose. What's the word I'm looking for? System profiles that we've found.
Yeah, I don't know if they're best practice. I think it's just like a swag, because like there may be really legitimate reasons why you run 2 gigs of RAM on your Alpine boxes. So, and we have no way of knowing that in advance, right? So we just like pick a number that we think makes sense.
Right, right. Like as a minimum, obviously you will increase that when required.
Cool.
All
So if
right.
you're moving off of RHEL, something that has Virt-Manager, and you need something to replace Virt-Manager, Cockpit machines. Uh,
Yeah.
the other place where that's really interesting, Nate, and I know that you've been doing a lot of work on this, is there's a ton of people out there that are running single node VMware,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like a VMware ESX hypervisor with a couple of boxes on it. And
Yep.
now they want to move to something that's not VMware. It is dead simple.
Yeah, it's great for like small embedded boxes you need to put somewhere that runs a couple of guests, not the big enterprise deployments you'd expect to run hundreds of VMs on. Although a big enough machine you could run hundreds of VMs on, I suppose. It's just that then
Yeah,
you've got this single point of failure to deal with.
and that's the thing is things like
Yeah,
clustering and that kind of stuff. Like
yeah,
that's not what we're talking about.
yeah,
Um, for that, you would have to go with a larger enterprise solution like OpenShift virtualization or Nutanix to
right,
get those kinds of features.
right, right.
So don't forget to mash that like and subscribe button. If you're in chat, hit us up with chats. If you are a deferred viewer and you have questions or comments, please feel free to leave a question or comment. Nate and I watch the channel and like put comments on things.
Somebody asked about my light the other day. I had to answer a question about my light, my hex lamp.
I mean, it's a very cool light. All right. So the other question that we've gotten recently was on one of our videos talking about memory management. Somebody said, I have a machine with small memory, only 2 gig. What do I do? How do I manage that?
Right.
So let's bring up my screen share here. So this is a RHEL 9 box, and it's got more than 2 gig, right? And I could see that because if I use free, that's the size of the memory. And if I use a free -H, it'll convert it to a human-friendly size. So this box has 15 gigs of RAM, and it's using about 2 gigs.
What a
So
terrible example, Scott. He asked for 2.
I'm getting there, Nate. Simmer down now. But notice that I'm using 2.
Yeah, okay. I get it.
So that's the big thing that you have to consider with a machine that has not very much RAM is what is the machine going to be doing and making good choices about what the machine's going to be doing. So for
Right.
example, for a machine that only has 2 gigs of RAM, you probably don't want to run a graphical desktop environment because that's going to eat up a bunch of your RAM.
You don't want to run that anyway.
I mean, but even if you were to do something, maybe you do it because you're like, oh, I can use half my RAM to run a graphical desktop environment. You know what you don't want to do on that graphical desktop environment? Run a browser, because like
pretty much, yeah.
on my work machine, I've got a bunch of Chrome tabs open, and those Chrome tabs are running applications, and it's using like some ungodly amount of memory. Which if you only have a couple gigs and you're using 1 gig for your desktop environment and you spawn up a browser, that the browser itself might be like, some megs. What's going to happen in the tabs that browser is running, right? Is that going to kick you into out of memory? So making good choices. But then the other question is like, how do you know how to make good choices? So we could do things like we were just talking about Cockpit and Cockpit machines. Well, how much memory is Cockpit and Cockpit machines using? So if I do a PS AUX, which gets me a list of all processes on the system, and I just grep for Cockpit processes. All right, so there's my Cockpit processes, and there's two pieces of memory. In fact, let me run it one more time with a header. There we go. So there's two pieces of memory information you're interested in: virtual size and resident size. So virtual size this is how much memory is in the process address space for this process. So when it asks the kernel to allocate some space for it, this is how much space it asks to be allocated. Resident set size, or RSS size, that's how much is actually being used resident in memory. So if you only have 2 gigs of memory, you're interested in, one, making sure your resident set size is smaller than 2 gigs. Because if it gets to 2 gigs, the out-of-memory killer is going to start. It's going to start, the kernel is going to start killing off processes to make memory. But the other thing you need to pay attention to is how much virtual size your processes are allocating. Because in theory, they could use up more of that virtual memory address space and grow their resident set size. And then you'll get into the same situation where you run out of real memory and the out-of-memory killer starts up and starts killing processes to free memory. If we're interested in not just looking at a single process, right? So we're looking at a process so we can say, hey, can I run Cockpit and administer my machine through Cockpit? Well, if I'm looking at this, we're talking about, I don't know, maybe 75 meg of space. That's the resident set size, right? Ballpark, adding it all up. And then the virtual size, it's like a gig. But a couple hundred meg, probably okay. So maybe I can use Cockpit to administer this machine, and that would be one of the things that I could fit in my 2 gigabytes of memory.
But then you have to think about the workloads you're also going to be running on the machine, right? So you're getting pretty tight with 2 gig.
Well, yes. And I would say 2 gig is like the bare minimum that you can assign. The actual recommended for RHEL is 4 gig, but it still won't get you things like a graphical desktop environment. So like more memory is more better. But this is just looking at one application and kind of looking at the memory usage of one application. What if you want to look over the entire system, right? So if we...
Probably a good idea.
Yeah, so... Right, this is all the memory in use on the system. In this field right here, that's your virtual size, and this field right here, that's your resident set size. But then we need to do a little bit of shell wizardry, right? Because we just like barfed all this stuff on the screen. How do you do the maths, right, and know how big it is?
Obviously, you copy and paste it into an Excel spreadsheet.
Try that. It will not work out well for you because it turns out PS doesn't use tabs as separators. It uses individual space characters as separators.
Oh, terrible design.
So I did a little bit of maths myself this morning. And it turns out that for virtual size, this field will be adjusted based off of the largest entity that's in this field. So your actual, like what characters you want to cut out of this may vary based on your machine. But for this machine, it's characters 27 to 34. So what I'm going to do is, because I am lazy, excuse me, I am inventive. So I'm going to get my list of processes. I'm going to cut out characters 27 to 34, which is that V size field that I'm interested in. And then when I have this like giant list of numbers, I'm going to substitute the delimiter between them to be a plus sign and then send that to the calculator.
BC, huh? I don't think I've ever used BC.
Well, you did today.
I got to see it today.
Yeah, man. BC is like one of the classic Unix and Linux commands. All right, if we actually wanted to see what that is in a actual disk space size, we could then take that number and we can what is it? 373, 10, 507, divide by 1024, 1020.
Nope, you got 1025 instead of 4.
Thank you. Which would make my math a little bit wrong, but that's fine.
We wouldn't want to throw off your math.
All right, so if we were looking at the virtual size field and we added them all up, and then we converted it to gigs, the virtual size of all the processors running on this machine add up to 35.5 gig of RAM. But again, there's a big difference between what memory address space has been requested by applications and what they're actually using. So if I do the same thing again, but instead start with fields character position 35 through 40, and then I do the same math again, but this time I plug in my new number.
Not even a gig.
Right? That size. All right, just under a gig.
Right.
So it looks like I could run all these things on my 2 gig system and still have some memory to spare, some growing room. But if all of a sudden all those applications started asking for memory, I'd be in big trouble.
Right. Right.
So
there's definitely tricks you can play there. And, this doesn't account for stuff like swap space and other things that give you virtual memory, but you definitely don't want to be living in swap. So, there's a lot of balance here. This is part of the systems administration life, I suppose.
Yeah, and you can also just make like better choices. So instead of having a multi-purpose machine that does lots of things, you want to be a single purpose machine that does one thing, right? So you carry a kernel, you carry a shell. So when you log into it, you get some stuff. You carry SSH, so you can get to it remotely, and then you install the software that's just for the application that box needs to run. And that's how you can kind of control the spread of how much memory one might need.
So really, we walked nicely through a Cockpit host. So if you were building like a central Cockpit host that you're going to manage other machines with through Cockpit, this might be a good footprint for that.
Yeah, but I wouldn't do 2 gig for that.
I probably wouldn't either. I don't think I'd do 2 gig for anything except a demo machine, to be honest.
2 gig. Imagine being a hypervisor and you only have 2 gigs of RAM. Like, what would your virtual machines even do?
No. I don't mean a hypervisor. I mean like a Cockpit jump host.
Gotcha.
Like here's Cockpit, and then I'm going to connect to subhosts from Cockpit, which is a thing you can do. But again, like there's probably memory consumption that comes along with those sub connections. So, yeah, 2 gig is tight. That's all there is to it. 2 gig is it's going to be tight for a fully fledged RHEL system. Right now, you could strip things down, you could remove services and lower that memory footprint, and do things to improve that. But a base RHEL system. Well, I think you said that the base recommendation is already 4. So yeah.
Yep.
All right. So all about memory consumption with Scott. That's fun stuff. All right. So our next question that we're going to address, somebody commented on one of our episodes that we were talking about security or SSH. I didn't see which episode this was from, but the comment was something along the lines of, I get 75,000 SSH attacks per night. So, over 75,000 Q Dragon Ball Z meme. And they basically want to know, like, what do I do about that? How can I stop that from happening? And I wanted to lead this with a little bit of discussion because, first of all, 75,000 SSH attacks per night for a system that's connected to the internet, kind of normal, right? I mean, do you disagree? That's a thing people do. People are always scanning the internet, looking for systems that are listening on port 22, and then they try to attack those systems. And it's just kind of the way it is in the world of internet connected systems. Now, there's a couple things you can do to limit that, but the thing you'd want to think about that, and first I wanted to caveat that with there are some things you could still be thinking in the back of your brain, like, well, is there still a performance impact to that? And I guess there is. There could be a minimal system performance impact because every time someone tries to connect to SSH, the SSH daemon has to respond. It's using TCP sockets. And, for any modern system, though, I bet it's negligible, right? Maybe that 2 gig system that we used in our first example would have trouble with 75,000 per night. But at any rate, and the other thing is more of a soft skill problem. And that is someone is probably reviewing these logs. Some security person or some monitoring system is watching your log files, and it may care, or the person that's looking at it may care, because they're going to get like alert fatigue from seeing all these failed attempts in their logs. And people who maybe succeed in an attempt to connect to SSH, or someone who's actually a legitimate threat, may blend into the noise, right? So there are some legitimate reasons to try to get rid of these. Now, you could filter logs, you could do things to say, well, these don't alert, these shouldn't be tracked, that kind of thing. And that might help. But we're here to provide solutions, not just platitudes, right? So let me bring my, oh, hold on, I got to switch my screen share before I can do that. See, I should have done this while Scott was talking. Like, I was too busy heckling Scott about server with GUI. This is what happens when that.
Make with the technology.
All right. This should be it. There we go. All right. Sorry, I was busy setting this up and didn't clear the screen. So, all right. So there's a few recommendations. The first would be make sure SSH is locked down, right? And as long as these 75,000 SSH attacks aren't succeeding, there aren't a ton to, there's not a ton to be worried about. So a couple things I would recommend, and I don't exactly have a demo cooked up for these, but do things like make sure that SSH password authentication is turned off and all of your users are connecting using SSH keys or some other sort of non brute forceable, right, authentication mechanism. The other thing is you could require a VPN connection to connect to SSH. That's another way to get this done. Or, and this I do have a demo for, we could try moving SSH to a different port. It's actually pretty easy to do. So if we go to like Etsy SSH, actually first let me show you something here. 2 S's. So if I look at my open TCP sockets, you can see right there, SSH is currently on 22. That's the default port. That's where it's going to be when you turn on a new RHEL box. Or I'd say most Linux boxes. We can change that configuration to switch it to a different port. And that's pretty much just called port, I think. No, I think it's, what did I say it was on? Line 21, I think. Let's just go there. Here, there we go. Line 21. You see it says port 22. Let's just change this to 222. Now, there's a caveat here, and we're going to talk about this as I'm making these changes. But this means that whenever somebody wants to connect to SSH on this machine, they need to remember that this is on a different port. So you need to have that documented. You need to make sure that your administrative staff knows. Anytime you run a tool that expects SSH to be on port 22, you're going to have to tell that tool it's on a different port. Some tools make that easier to change than others. I've never run into one that doesn't let you change it, but they're always, you know, sometimes it's just a field. Sometimes it's some weird command line switch you have to add. Sometimes you got to add a colon in the other port. You know, it gets weird like that. This is also just like an security by obscurity thing, and I never recommend security by obscurity as a solution. It could be a piece of the puzzle, but this, you're not just going to do this and be done. Okay, so the other thing we got to pay attention to, and it says it right here above this line, it says, if you want to change the port number on an SELinux system, which if you're on a RHEL system and you're using the best practices, you're on an SELinux system, you've got to tell SELinux about this change, and they give you the command right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to save this. And then I actually, because you got to put the port number in there as well. I have it in my notes here, so I didn't have to type all that out, because SELinux commands are never easy to type. So SEManage port, right? And we're going to tell it the SSH port includes now port 222. Okay? And then I can restart SSHD. Now, if you're managing your machine over SSH, and you change the SSH port, and you restart the SSH daemon, there's a really good chance you're going to get disconnected. So keep that in mind. But I'm not managing it over SSH. All right, so now if I looked at that SSS or SS from earlier, why should I type such a simple command as SS when I can just use my up arrow to get back to it? There it is. There we go. We've got now port 222 is listening for SSH.
Yeah. And in the chat, Rick was pointing out that this is security by obscurity. And I would argue that it's not security, because your system is not inherently any more secure or less secure by changing the port number. What you're doing is making it so that those automated bot attacks stop against the system because they're not on the right port. And Rick points out that yes, but some bots are smart and will scan and actually like attack the other ports. Fair, but
some are, yeah.
You're going to eliminate a lot of them.
You're one port scan away from someone finding the new port.
Right, but again, it's not about increasing security of the machine.
Right.
It's about reducing the number of automated, low quality attack connections. If you were concerned about security, shouldn't be a problem anyway because you didn't set your admin password to admin.
Yeah. And that was kind of the point of my preamble at the beginning of this. 75,000 SSH attack attempts are not a security problem. Successes are a security problem, right? So if one of those 75,000 attempts got in, you have a real problem, right? If they're just hitting and annoying your administrators with a bunch of denials in the logs, find a way to filter it out, right? Like my opinion, filter it out. But we actually have another demo, and I just changed the SSH port back to 22 because the next demo is going to expect SSH to be on 22. Because again, like I was saying, if you move things around, some tools are going to want you to go through some extra hoops. But the next thing is fail to ban. And what fail to ban does is it'll watch your logs or it'll watch other things. There's different metrics that it can consume. And what it'll do is if it sees bad behavior, it'll take an action on it. And in this case, the default rule set for SSH, which we're going to use in just a second here, what it'll do is if it sees SSH authentication failures, it will eventually block the person for some time period, and that's all configurable. Block the IP address that it came from. And this will help limit those failures in the log. It'll also, if you are using password authentication, it could cut off a brute force attempt, right? Because sometimes securing a machine isn't about blocking all the 0 days. It's not about blocking all the threats, making sure that the bad actors can't get to your machine or can't succeed. It's about making it harder, right? Security is generally about making it harder. And if I can only make 6 attempts on your machine and then I'm blocked for 3 hours, and then I can make 6 more attempts and I'm blocked for 3 hours, eventually I'm going to say, this ain't worth it. My brute force attack is never going to get through, right? So that's a benefit for you, and they might move on to an easier to hack target. So anyway, let's get on with the demo. So first of all, I didn't install it yet, so I wanted to show you the name of the package. This is from Apple. I've already installed Apple. You probably saw that on my screen when I switched to my screen share. It's just fail to ban. DNF install fail to the number 2 ban. Okay. And this comes out of the box with a bunch of predefined configurations. We're just going to turn on the SSH configuration that's already there. There's a bunch of, I forgot the -y. If I had to put that, I wouldn't be hitting Y all the time here. There's a bunch of additional modules in Apple that will add in additional functionality. You can see here that it's doing a firewall D plugin. It's doing a send mail plugin, which probably also accommodates for postfix, but I'm not sure that's what's running on a RHEL machine. But if I did a DNF search for fail to ban, you'll see all the different modules that are listed. Just a second here. Come on, you just did a DNF thing. You don't have to recheck me. Let's go. There we go. So you can see there's a bunch of different things in here that you could add. I thought there were more yesterday. That's weird. At any rate, there's modules you can add. Okay, so now we're going to configure it to actually use or actually monitor SSH. So if we go to etc fail to ban, there's some configuration files in here, and there's a jail.d directory, which you might want to care about. That's like you can put additional configurations in there. There's also this jail.conf, and the SSH already has like a stub configuration in jail.conf. So I'm going to go into there. And inside of here, I mean, it's 980 lines long. It has a bunch of comments and whatnot. You can see here it's got some examples, like it even gives you an example of how to turn on SSHD. But there's a section here already defined for SSHD. And you can see here it says port SSH. This is where I would have had to change that port number if I had left it on port 222. We're just going to add a new line in here that says, I think it was enabled equals true. Not dash. Okay. And you can change like this mode up here is like how severe it's going to be, or how aggressive it's going to be is the word I'm looking for. I'm not going to change that though. We're going to leave it at the default. So now that it's enabled, I think all I have to do is start up fail to ban. Yep. So typing. I should have copied. It's right there in the notes. I should have just copied it. So system CTL enable now fail to ban. That starts up fail to ban. We look at the fail to ban log. You can see, hey, look, the SSHD jail is in operation. So that's pretty cool. But I like my demos to have an actual like proof in the pudding thing here. So I have this second host here, which is able to SSH over to the machine I just configured fail to ban on. So we're just going to try to SSH into root at RHEL. And I don't even know what the password is. Maybe I do. I didn't note down what the password is. I'm just going to put in completely random stuff here to simulate a brute force attack, right? And now if I go back over here, you're going to see, hey, look, there's these attempts on SSHD, and it figured out what IP address I'm coming from. There's only 3 of them. I guess I could have looked at what the limit is, but I didn't. So we're going to do it a few more times. This is real exciting stuff, right? Watching me manually brute force a machine with no rhyme or reason. Now, if I keep it up, look, after 6 attempts, it doesn't even let me SSH into the machine anymore. And if I look over here, it's like, ha, banhammer. This guy's not okay. He's failed the root authentication 6 times in a row. I mean, I'm going to give you some grace for fat fingering a password, but 6 times, that doesn't look good. So there you go. They're banned. And again, you can configure how long you're going to have someone banned for. You can monitor other services aside from SSHD, but obviously, since the question was for SSHD, actually right here, it says ban time. What's that? 10 minutes. I'm banned for 10 minutes. So in 10 minutes, I could try again.
Nate, look at you doing maths in your head. Amazing.
In my head. Not like that off the cuff math you were doing with the memory footprints there. Those were bigger numbers. So, are there any questions about fail to ban before I stop my share?
Nope.
Awesome. So, yeah, fail to ban. I used to use a similar tool when I ran in production as a systems administrator. It did the same basic thing, and that's leveraging Firewall D, right? So, it's the firewall that's already on your system. So it's really easy to get that installed and configured. Of course, you're going to want to think a little bit about what those limits are and what services you want to monitor and what you want to monitor for. It's not just quick and dirty the way I did it, but it's a good, oh man, I'm getting all these attacks. I'd really like to just stop them. Install it, put a little bit of thought into configuring it, and there you go. You'll start banning them.
So our last question was actually not really a question. It was more a series of statements on one of our videos about Network Manager and moving from network scripts to Network Manager. Nate, I'm going to surprise you. There was a lot of ire about moving to Network Manager.
What? You mean we changed something and people were mad about it? That
Right.
never happens in comments on the internet.
So before we start talking about Network Manager, here's the thing, guys. We started using Network Manager in RHEL 6.
Yeah, but we didn't force you to use it, so everyone didn't.
Well, and honestly, in RHEL 6, not the best.
Yeah.
RHEL 7, it was reasonable, but anybody who tried it in RHEL 6, they were like, nope, not going to get me again. And so in RHEL 8, we actually deprecated the old network scripts, which is what was using the IFCFG files. But we kept them in RHEL 8. So you could either run Network Manager, or you could run the networking service, which is the same as what we had in RHEL 7.
Right.
But in RHEL 9, we said, no more networking service, Network Manager only. And in RHEL 10, that's going to continue to be the case. All right, so people were like, but I like my 5-line config file that I've used for a bajillion years. And it's like, I get it. I get it. But that's like 2002 Linux administration. And here we are in 2025 doing Linux administration.
And those bridges and stuff that I showed you when I was doing the web console, if you've ever set up a bridge through a VLAN through a physical interface that's on like a VLAN trunk, I mean, good luck. If you ever set that up through those old flat config files, I've done it. The first time I got one to work, I copied it and pasted it into a doc. Like, I don't understand how this works, but here's the incantation. With Network Manager, it's so much easier. You're just like, their Nmcli commands, add me a bond, or not a bond, add me a VLAN interface. Here's the ID. Add me a bridge, add an IP to the bridge, right? And boom, it works.
And the same thing is true for bonding, right? Like, bonding is more significant IFCFG configuration files. In fact, you have to create another one for your bonded interface to be treated with that has your IP settings and other stuff. And then you need to go to the component devices and add some stuff to tell it that belongs to this other bonded interface. Whereas Nmcli makes that relatively simple with a couple of commands. All right, but I get it. People are like, they don't like change. I understand. The change has happened. And we can rage against it, or it can be like, okay, you guys started about doing this 15 years ago.
Yeah, we gave you a decade and a half. It's time to move.
Right. Oh no, my box died. Let me restart.
It expired.
Which I even set it so it would like remind me, and I could extend it. I just wasn't paying attention.
That's because you were too enthralled with my fail to ban demo. Admit it.
Clearly, that was it. Too enthralled with fail to ban.
So, I mean, there is a question we could try to field while your machine is starting up. And the question is, will RHEL 10 provide NetPlan? And NetPlan appears to be a canonical tool, I suppose, for networking. I haven't used it before. I feel like it's probably not going to be included in RHEL, though.
I don't think so. But once we get this box back up, I have the RHEL 10 beta, so we can look. But I've never used NetPlan, so we'll see. I don't think so. I will say that there are pretty significant differences between how the Debian derivative distros like Ubuntu manage interfaces versus Red Hat related distros.
So, and that goes back a long time. Just sort of the way that they were defined is a whole different structure than even the old flat files were in RHEL.
Right. Well, they use a INI format, which itself can be pretty complex in terms of the parameters and other things. So even a lot of places have moved on from the 5-line config file that has historically been with Red Hat from a long time ago. Because the big reason is because we now have a lot more parameters that one can set on network interfaces. And doing it through a giant configuration file is unwieldy.
Yes. Yes, it is. And we keep calling it a 5-line configuration file. They could be 20, 30, 40 lines if you wanted to get really deep into all of the configuration options of your network card. But there wasn't a whole lot of like context sensitive help, for example. There was a lot of research that had to be put into those.
Yeah. So just real quick, I'm looking to see if anything provides NetPlan. Looks like there's some Python-y stuff. There's a NetPlan Python for Clarnet.
It looks to me from the quick Google search that I did that NetPlan may be, oh no, I guess it is above Network Manager. It's just another front end for Network Manager. So I don't know. It doesn't look like it's included. Will it ever? Who knows?
Yeah, maybe it'll be over in extra packages for Enterprise Linux. It doesn't make the cut for the RHEL distro directly.
Right.
All right. So the other like complaint was Network Manager is too hard to use because the commands are too complex.
Right. Now that we finally had your lab.
If you like look at the documentation on Red Hat site, I could see where you would get that impression, because network manager commands are often multiple criteria passed together. And, how do you remember all the words that you need to use?
Right.
Here's the thing. They are bash completion aware. So if I'm interested in looking at my network connections, Nmcli, tab, here are the things I can do with Nmcli. I can start an agent, look at connections, look at devices, just get general information, ask for help, right? So these are the next command entry that I need to make, one of these. So I could do something like connection. And then I hit tab a couple times. Okay, so because we said Nmcli connection, here are the next words that you can add after connection. You can add a connection, you can clone a connection, you can delete a connection, you can up or down a connection, right? So like these are the things that you use to build the connection you want. So maybe I just want to show, right? So these are my connections. Maybe I want to show a specific one like ENS3. And so when you drill down, you can get more details on all the parameters. So this is all the different options that one can set or change on this interface and this connection, right? And it is
Long.
162 options. Would you want to open a configuration file that has 162 options? I'm not interested in doing
I don't
it.
know. Failed-to-ban had 900 something lines in its config file, so maybe.
Yeah, and it was super obnoxious. Right? So like your 5-line IFCFG script is not all that was there. It was just obscuring all the things that
Right.
were there. And a lot
That's
of
true.
things you could set were not reflected in the networking script setup.
Right. Some of them were done with, what was that, ETH tool, right? And I don't think those ever made it into the network scripts, or maybe they could be set in the network script. But the whole point is there were a bunch of ways to get things done, and Nmcli or Network Manager in general puts them into one place.
Right. And so again, if you're now I want to change one of those parameters, Nmcli, connection, modify, ENS3. And then it's like, hey, there's 326 possibilities to modify on ENS3. Yes, show me all the options so that I can then choose the
Find
next
the one you want, yeah.
right? So let's see, there's IPv4 address right there, IPv4 addresses, right? And at each stage, just like if we're typing commands on the command line and using files and tab-based completion on files, I can use tab-based completion on all of these options, right? All right, so now I actually have to put in the IP address I want.
Yeah, once you get to a point where there's not an automatic option, yeah. Now, the other thing I like, and not to sidetrack your demo, but you can use shortcuts for a lot of these. Once you know the commands, like once you've done them a few times, Nmcli, connection, modify, yada, yada, yada. You could do like Nmcli C for connection, or you could say con, or you could say connect, right? It's just basically the shortest number of characters to make it unique is what is actually required. And then in your example here, S would be for show, right? So you could say SH, SHO, SHOW, or just S, right? And there you go. So this is very similar to how like Cisco iOS does it. So for networking folks, this is probably very similar, very familiar. And maybe that's why it ended up here. I'm not really sure. But I think it's a really nice feature.
Yeah, so I actually don't care about the abbreviations because I can remember tab. That's one thing I have to remember.
That's true. That's true.
But if I have to remember C and S and A and M or MOD, so
my point is there's options. If you're the sort of person who remembers the whole lexicon of things and you just want to type more quickly, then you can do it this way.
Yeah. But that was the extent of my demo, right? It's like, sorry, we moved the cheese. It's actually been moving for 15 years.
Yeah, it's a really old cheese.
It's right, a little bit moldy. But it doesn't have to be terrible, right? Tab-based help to complete the commands will help you build out these, what seem to be from the outside, these disgustingly, hideously long things. They don't need to be that way, right? We're as administrators, we don't have to memorize all the different options. We can just use tab.
Right. But whoever it is that's looking over your shoulder that hands out badges for when you remember the commands, they may frown on you. I've never actually found that person, but you always think they're there.
All right, so that runs us off the end of our people left comments and asked questions, and we decided to make it a thing.
Yeah.
So don't forget to mash that like and subscribe. Please feel free to leave comments or chats, and maybe we'll do another one day. And
maybe we'll do another one
thing that we do.
Just don't leave mean ones. Oh, we totally didn't cover the one comment passkey.
One comment. Yes, we also had a comment. We were talking about this. We were playing the episode. There was a comment where somebody just commented passkey.
Yeah, which might have been a statement, might have been a suggestion, might have been a question. It's hard to tell.
We do our best. We do our best, folks. All right. Next week, we will not be doing it in the terminal. We will be back in 2 weeks.
Actually, I think the week after we're out. Is that the 21st?
Are we out?
I think we're out for a recharge day.
Oh, man.
So you might be missing 2 weeks. You'll be totally jonesing for some Into the Terminal by the time we get back at the end of February.
Oh, you're right. That is our recharge day. Spurious Red Hat company holidays.
Sorry, folks, but we're going to take the day off because we're allowed to. Not that you're not important.
Yeah, just out of to complete the circle there. So Red Hat has these things called recharge days. We get one a quarter. In 2 weeks on Friday is our company issued holiday where everybody at Red Hat gets to not come to work that day for the first quarter. So it looks like we're coming back in 3 weeks, but that's cool because Nate, we should have a bang up episode because we'll have 2 weeks of planning to do.
Yeah.
Before
I'm sure we totally won't be feverishly planning it the week we're back. It'll be really well planned.
No. Because I heard your manager was like, you guys got to do better.
Right. He totally said that. Totally. So just one last comment call out. There was a comment just in the chat here that Aaron wishes that more bash commands had tab completion. And there's actually quite a few. And I believe it's pluggable, right? So if you are a maintainer of some command line, you can make a bash autocomplete plugin and drop it in there. Or you can make your own if you want to, right? If you really wish a thing had bash completion and you really care that much about it, go write one. I have no idea how to do that, but I know it's possible. So you go be great.
All right, guys. Until next time, this has been Into the Terminal, and we'll see you around.
Everybody have a great one.